Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Beauty of Books, a series dedicated to, you guessed it, books. So, today's episode: a con man becomes a saint, a Jew becomes a Christian, nuns having sex with priests and gardeners. Of course, I'm talking about the crazy world of Boccaccio's Decameron. Now today you're in for a treat. I'm going to show you one of the oldest books in my collection. Right here. This is a translation of the Decameron. It's so old you can't even see the title anymore. It was bound and stitched back in the late 1800s, probably around 1870 or so, by a man named Thomas Wright. Thomas Wright was a scholar. He was an antiquary. He did collections of English prose, including some the Decameron, and he also did the Canterbury Tales, which is based on this book right here. Well, not this book, but the Decameron by Boccaccio preceded the Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. That's where he got the idea for the tales, was from Boccaccio's Decameron. Anyway, this book is basically, you have an author telling about an author, telling about 7 authors, telling 100 stories while escaping the Black Death of 1348 in medieval Europe. Now it was like 7 women and 3 men. They got together and they said, we're going to escape the Black Death, and they escaped. They ran to this villa, and they would meet in afternoons underneath a shady tree, and they would just tell stories. They would tell stories over a period of 10 days, and that's where the name comes from. Decameron means 10 days. And they would just tell stories, and eventually it became 100 stories after 10 days. And so I guess it was a happy ending. They survived the Black Plague, and they went back home after they were done telling their stories. So, let's turn it over. I'm going to have Hans show this book to you. I'm going to turn it over to Hans now. Are you ready, Hans? There's our book. And there's Hans. Hi, Hans. Okay. Today's book is the Decameron. You can tell it's a very old book. See, it's falling apart. You really can't even see the title anymore. Decameron. Gold. It's gold, and I'm not sure if that makes it more expensive or not. Stitching, I don't know who did the stitching. Someone tried to restitch it. Anyway, I'll show you the signatures later on. So, here we go. The Decameron. The Decameron is 10 days. 10 days entertainment by Boccaccio, with an introduction by Thomas Wright, M.A., F.S.A. F.A. M.S.A. Now, this means that Thomas Wright was an antiquary published in London. It wasn't really published in 1886. I'll show you, it was published before then. Chatto in Windus, Piccadilly. Now, I don't know who Francis Berry is, but I can tell you that 1207 K Street Northeast, Washington, D.C. is now a apartment building. I think it was a library back in maybe the 1800s. I think maybe Francis Berry owned this book in 1886. So, a bit about the publisher. Shadow and Windus was founded in 1885 by John Camden Houghton. After his death in 1883, it was sold to Houghton's junior partners, Andrew and Shadow, and W.E. Windus. Now, if you get on, you Google a list of books published by Shadow and Windus, you'll find that Shadow and Windus also published books of famous authors of the time, such as Walt Whitman and Mark Twain. In the list you'll find the Decameron by Thomas Wright, sold for 7 shillings and 6 pennies in the 1800s. Price today is probably about $4 to $8. So, Thomas Wright was an antiquary. He had a Master of Arts, 1810 to 1877. He was an FSA, which is a Fellow of Society of Antiquaries. So, Thomas Wright published anthologies of English works, like the Decameron, including the Chester plays, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. He did non-fiction as like the Dictionary of Obsolete and Provincial English. He also translated works from Latin to English. Now, Giovanni Boccaccio was an Italian writer and poet, an important Renaissance humanist. He studied Latin and Greek. He wrote many works in Latin, such as biographies of famous women. The Decameron was written in 1353. It's a collection of 100 tales written by a group of 7 young women and 3 young men that were seeking shelter in a secluded villa just outside Florence to escape the Black Death, also known as the Great Plague, an epidemic transferred by fleas and rats that significantly reduced the population of Europe between 1347 and 1351. In the Decameron, Boccaccio depicts human nature and its weakness and heroic virtue, particularly as revealed in comic and dramatic situations. Just about every story shows a kind of worldly prudence with which characters overcome difficult situations. Boccaccio was not particularly proud of the Decameron, even though it became his most famous work. It's also become a standard reading in Italian literary prose. There are several movies based on the Decameron, most in Italian. On YouTube, again, you can look up the Decameron movie in 1971, the Decameron Nights movie in 1953. So, shall we take a look at this book? There's the table of contents. First day, there's the stitching. Now, I don't know who did the stitching. It wasn't me. I promise you it wasn't me. Table of contents shows the little synopsis of each of the stories. A preface by Thomas Wright. The Decameron of Boccaccio is one of the earliest and most remarkable of those collections of popular stories which appeared after the celebrated collection of the Gesta Ramorum, which was clothed in Latin, the ruling language of the early Middle Ages. It goes on to tell you more about this book, how it became to be. It's also a calendar from 1960. This was in the book when since I don't know who. So there's that's when this book was actually written. London, December 8th, 1878, by Thomas Wright. Here he says, must become an important part of literatures of the time. Some account of the writings of Concho. Now, most of the stories in the movies are about, like sex, but not all the stories are like that. I'll take you to. A lot of that going on. I'd like to show you this story. Novel 2. Abraham the Jew. Now, some translations will call this the second story instead of novel 2. And instead of the wickedness of the clergy, they call it the depravity of the clergy. So it's kind of a humorous depiction of, another thing a bit about the bindings, stitching the signature. See these are all called signatures. print it and fold it, and then I'll stitch them all together. Stitch them all together like that. See the back of this, I don't know why the back of this book doesn't have the list of other books by Shadow and Windows. Again, there's names of people. I think these are the people that have owned the book. Just goes the end. Let's see. It's flaking. And that wasn't too painful now, was it? I thought it was quite interesting. Maybe there is hope for the human race. Read this book and find out. Now, later on in the series, I'm going to show you, later on this summer, I'm going to show you some of my graphic novels and some of my comic books, like Dracula. It's a graphic novel. And I also have lots of issues of Conan the Barbarian. So, there's a lot in store for you this summer. I hope you'll come back and join me again for the beauty of books. See ya.